Hello everyone, this is China Paradigm, where we, Daxue Consulting, interview seasoned entrepreneurs in China.
Hello everyone, I'm Matthew David, the founder of Daxue Consulting and podcast China Paradigm. And today I'm with Thomas Nixon. You are the co-founder of Qumin. Qumin is a digital creative agency.
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, Matthew. So yes, Qumin, as so kindly introduced us, was founded by three of us. So there was Yenpeng, who is sort of, I would say, native Chinese and has kind of moved over to the UK probably when he was doing his university degree. And that's where he met Arnold, who actually was born in Xi'an in China, but moved over to the UK when he was about 11 years old. So Arnold has this great ability to kind of see things both from the Chinese side, but also a Western side. And then there was myself, who was, as you can tell, very, very English, but started studying Chinese when I was quite young, and then did Chinese at university. So we've always kind of had this ability to look at things across the whole spectrum, from a Chinese side and both from a Western side. And that's helped us to establish that presence in an international market, doing Chinese work, as well as doing Chinese work in China and supporting companies there. So the London office was actually the first office that we set up, because that's where we all met. And there was a sort of distinct lack at that time of any companies outside of China supporting businesses to access the Chinese market. And when I talk about the Chinese market, I'm not just simply referring to China and mainland, talking about all of the Chinese diaspora that live across the world, which have become, I guess, so crucial and instrumental to the growth of a lot of the luxury industry, for example. Then I remember back in sort of the early days at universities, and they still continue to thrive in Western markets from foreign students. So in the early days, it was kind of working and supporting overseas tourism and Chinese people that were looking at studying abroad. Then we began to sort of expand and grow and build out our service offering. So we are a full service digital agency. It was very sort of important for us right from the beginning to offer everything from the brand creative through to the technical execution. The majority of us are actually from technical marketing backgrounds. So we began working with brands that were beginning to enter into China from the first time, but everything was kind of led from a performance marketing point of view from their global teams. So we began working with their global teams in Western markets. And that sort of meant that we then had to open up a Shanghai operation. So in about 2013, one of our first sort of really big clients was Skyscanner, Tianxin.
Which was bought by Ctrip.
Yes, yeah. So we were there from right at the beginning when they were talking about entering into mainland China, all the way through for about 3 or 4 years, through to that acquisition with Ctrip. So we saw that full journey, which was super exciting to be on. And we had to do lots of things that were very much out of our comfort zone. So it took us as an agency on a kind of growth spurt and allowed us to learn a lot about how to establish and set up tech companies in China. So that led to a growth in our Shanghai operation, which is headed up there by Peng, who you introduced. And we're still relatively, I would say, lean operation in Shanghai, around 10 people. And the majority of the operations from a performance, a creative, sort of accounts point of view does still happen in the UK. And then I'd say in China, they have a small accounts team and then a few operational people where we haven't been able to find the skill sets necessarily that we want here. And our insights team is obviously based on the ground in China. And then we've recently, after a lot of growth working with sort of international clients, began to establish a more of a client services operation in in New York. And that's largely because we are seeing a lot of demand for the same services that we've been offering for largely European companies, from the London office for American companies in the States. So we just wanted to be geographically closer to a lot of our sort of key clients that are expanding over there. So yeah, we've probably, as you can choose, we've probably got quite a number of quite high profile clients, both from working with Chinese companies expanding internationally, from Western companies going into China. We tend to have a kind of almost, we call it a market maturity model. As we begin to work with brands, we need to establish at what sort of phase they're at in their growth journey. So whether they're targeting the Chinese traveler, and to date they've never done anything in mainland China, there are a lot of sort of tactical executions that we can do to help businesses drive Chinese growth, but purely from Chinese living outside of China or Chinese tourists traveling outside of China. And then that sometimes moves then into cross-border e-commerce, cross-border sales for those brands. And eventually when they feel there is a big enough market demand, it then moves into market entry, and then from there into market growth. So it's different people always have a kind of different entrance point. So we tend to work with quite a large number of clients. I think last year, I believe we had about 34 clients across the agency. And probably at any one time, we've probably got somewhere around 15 active sort of client projects going on. They range from everything from retained, what we call sort of business as usual social media work, helping grow sort of communities for some of our brands, or lead generation activity, all the way through to campaign executions that are aimed at either driving sales for a new product, or for looking at driving awareness around key periods of the year for certain brands. So yeah, it used to be quite a heavy mix towards retained work, and now it's, as the clients get larger, things have changed a bit more into more project-based campaigns.
I see. Yeah, because they wouldn't let you manage their own social media and so on. They're already present in China, so it's more based on the campaign. You may work for them. You talked about the size of the team in Shanghai, but you didn't tell us about the total size of the team and more numbers about the size of Qumin. Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, of course. So we're just over 30, and there's only a few at the moment that are kind of operating out of the States. So the majority of that team is based in London.
Okay.
One of the key, we've had a few fluctuations actually over the years, and it's one of the things that I think is a challenge for a lot of Western agencies that are operating in China. And you'll probably know this from the networks around Shanghai, is that for us, we have a very high standard of what we want to deliver for, because of the caliber of the clients that you've mentioned. Every single thing that we communicate to that client, whether it's an update in a report, an email, all the way through to the actual work itself, it has to be absolutely perfect in the way that everything is written, the way it's communicated, in the way that we're doing our data analytics, because they have high expectations. These are the world's biggest and best companies largely. So it's always been very important for us to control that quality. And it's one thing that attention to detail is something that we've always struggled to get from our operation in China over the years. Like we have invested a lot of time into building out that team. We have had bigger teams in China over the years, but ultimately we found that because of the staffing and the what I believe is a kind of a huge investment into the digital industry in China, and specifically Shanghai, the wages have increased. People have churned. The churn is very high for people going to new jobs. So you get a lot of what I call title jumping, where somebody is probably a title 2 or 3 times, even sometimes, what their actual ability level is. So the problem is you end up having to hire 3 people to do the job that one person should be doing, which is not an effective way to run a commercial operation. So we've tended to find that the quality of the Chinese staff that we can find in the UK is actually higher than sometimes what we can find in China. And because we're closer to the client, it's easier to control that output and that communication, which is kind of where we see a little bit of our advantage in some places, but it can be a disadvantage in others. So it's been an interesting challenge for us.
I see. I like people, before we move to the challenges, I know that's something you wanted to talk about. I like to make sure that people listening to us really understand what you do. So the services you provide, from what we see on your website, is branding, CRM, experiential, field administration, KOL naming, PPC, SEO, social strategy, in a more specific way and very easy to understand for people listening to us. I would like to take some cases. You have worked for Manchester United, so it's a case that you advertise a lot on your website, and you say that on the website you work specifically for them on the CRM. So how do you work on the CRM for a club through a campaign? For me, the words don't link to each other's very easily. Could you explain more?
Yeah, of course. So one thing I think people are not so clear on often is the way that businesses operate when they are football clubs. So ultimately, a football club gets all of its commercial value, its sponsorship value, from its number of marketable records. So it's when a sponsor comes along, they say, okay, if I attach my brand to this particular football club, I'm going to get not just this awareness and reach through the TV media, but I'm also going to get access to be able to sell my products to their fans. And that's the reason that Manchester United is the most, commercially astute clubs on the planet, is because they have a very, very strong and rich CRM database of marketable records. Now, one of the challenges for them in China was a lot of the methodologies that they were using in the West to collect those marketable records was actually they didn't work. For example, so they had apps and systems that they could use on Facebook or on Twitter to kind of get people to sign up to win football shirts or signed balls. And but in China, those activities. Those platforms didn't work, and those activities often didn't work. So they have, I believe it's 8 to 9 million followers on Sina Weibo. I think just over maybe 100,000 or so on WeChat, based on sort of what you see from the kind of read rates as well. So one of the problems for us is that audience base had actually become quite expensive to reach from a Weibo perspective, because of the cost of doing Weibo ads to reach your own fans. But on WeChat, it becomes saturated. So we'd got to the point where we'd almost captured every single record of all of the WeChat followers. So we wanted to help them grow beyond those numbers. And so the campaigns that we've ran over we've been working with them now probably about 3 years. And we've run a series of different types of campaigns. So I think the first one, we built a technical solution to allow them to actually host competitions in China and capture those records. So that particular solution worked across Weibo and across WeChat, and we could very quickly spin up a short quiz that then people could enter and begin to capture. We could capture those records for them. The other application that we built was a H5 app, which was a selfie app, which allowed you to kind of have a virtual selfie with one of the Man United players, which is a fun one to create, because we got to go and shoot loads of imagery of all the players, and I got to meet the idols.
H5, for people who don't know, H5 is a responsive website, HTML5. You can open on WeChat, you can open on your mobile, and because China is mobile first, it's essential to create H5.
Yeah, absolutely. And because actually, a lot of people talk about Weibo and WeChat, but actually there are so many other platforms that people are on. So often if you're trying to build an application just specific to one platform in China, I do find it a lot better to build these HTML5 apps and H5 apps as they're known in China. So we then had quite good success from the Selfie app, but then again we found that it was only reaching a football audience, a specific Manchester United football audience, which with very little media spend that was available to kind of amplify these, we had to rely on a lot of organic traction, which is difficult to do on platforms when it's something specific to just football fans. So we went back to the kind of drawing table, and we went and did some insight into actually how Chinese football fans behaved, both online but in offline as well in the real world. And we found that the consumption of football was actually happening a lot more late at night because of the timing of the games that they were watching. It was largely young single men that loved gaming and manga, and a lot of the time they were watching these things either late at night in the dorm rooms or at internet cafes. So we found that their experience of football was often combined with them gaming at the same time, or
I see,
engaging in manga. So we came up with an idea with the club to basically create something for the first time that was actually made specifically for that Chinese audience. So it wasn't something like at first where it's a quiz that could be for any market, or the Selfie app that could be for any market. It was actually something that was based on Chinese insight. So then we basically developed a full manga story and then animated it, drew all the pictures, and that you'll probably see on the website. We also have,
I do see it.
A few videos. That was obviously quite a difficult process because we have to get sign off from all the players. There are a few nuances about who can have horns and who can't have horns when they're devils, and there was a lot of back and forth about Jose Mourinho and things like that. So from a creative point of view, it was a big challenge, but we then created alternative story arcs as well within the actual video. So depending on which route you chose, you got a different outcome of the kind of story, but we had the same ending. And as part of that process, we had what we called a progressive CRM data capture. So rather than just having the data capture up front as just a name, phone number, email address, those kind of fields, we actually integrated it into the story. So at certain points, they would ask for certain pieces of information.
I see.
Which just made it a lot more richer and engaging. And that way, we weren't just collecting records. We were actually building some affinity with the fans and building something that they could really kind of engage with and feel was created for them. So yeah, it was hugely successful. We actually won a few awards in the UK for it. One of the first, actually the first Chinese marketing award at a UK marketing awards event. So that was quite good.
It's very interesting because I see the creativity not being only in the design, not only being in the digital aspect of how to publish and content and so on, but also the way to interact, the way to engage with the audience. And creating a game. Within the game, you have a quiz, which is also part of the creation. How you engage with a fan, the client. I went to your website, and you advertise on one website for your campaign, which is called unitedfans.cn. And you ask. I was a bit surprised when I went on your website, and I guess through this example, I will know more about what you did. You ask for the email. You ask for the email, you ask for the name, the birthday, the country, and the email. But the email in China is so less used than WeChat and even Weibo or others. How come did you ask for the email?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that over the last 3 years has been a constant discussion. We've always felt that it was better to build and develop a social CRM for Manchester United. So, as you mentioned, sort of WeChat records, because every email address that comes through that we were capturing was QQ numbers with the @qq.com at the end, as you know, right? So we were kind of a bit concerned from our point of view that these people wouldn't have email addresses, first of all, but then second of all, they wouldn't use them. But actually, China has one of the highest open rates for the Man United's email marketing database than any other market, which was extremely surprising to me.
It is.
So somebody is using those emails, which to us is kind of never dampened the spirits of the client to continue to push for that particular market or record. Obviously, for them, it's kind of key to push through the types of advertising you would get through an email. It's very hard to do that through SMS, CRM, or trying to do that through other channels except for WeChat. Like I do feel that WeChat is the strongest opportunity for them. But the ownership of WeChat within the United team was in a different department. So it kind of, for us, it was very important to just drive emails. But yeah, it's still to this day, it does get one of the highest open rates of any market.
Could you share some numbers for open rates? When you say highest number of open rate, for me, a good open rate would be 10-20%. So it would be higher than this.
No, I think for them they're open because of the volume and the number of subscribers they have. But yeah, around the 10% mark is
10%, which is high. Yeah,
it's good. It's a good solid open rate.
Okay, so now I understand better. The business model of a club is to actually make it possible for the sponsor to reach their audience. Like we see Adidas, Chevrolet, which are sponsoring Manchester United. And for this, they need a very strong CRM. And through your campaigns, through the games, through the quiz, through the community you built, you were able to get more records on this audience in China, opening a new market for the sponsors of Manchester United. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, very, very interesting. You have worked, I think, one of the first clients you had was Chinatown.
In terms of our Chinese work, I think it was slightly different. I think we had other clients that kind of really drove us forward in being our foundation for the work we did in China. But what Chinatown did allow us to do, and they were a kind of very supportive client, the company that owns a lot of the retail in Chinatown, was it allowed us to actually do Western marketing, but from a Chinese perspective. And that really helped us when it came to now working with these Chinese companies as they're expanding internationally, because it allowed us to do things in reverse to what we were typically doing them. So with Chinatown, we built them an English-facing website and a Chinese-facing website. We ran their Facebook, their Instagram, and their Twitter, as well as their Weibo and WeChat. And so when it came to creating that content, we were often creating it for two markets. So we had to create a strategy that basically bridged those two audience groups. And you'll know this as well as anybody, as a Westerner living in China, you know the real China. You know what China is actually like. For a Western person living in, let's say, France or in the UK, they don't really know what China is like, or they don't understand the real China. They have a very sort of stereotypical view, cliched view of China. You know, it's all lanterns, it's pagodas and arches and triads and ducks hanging up in windows.
And I don't see that every day in China.
Right. So what we wanted to do is effectively rebrand Chinatown as a destination in London to be somewhere that represents what China really stands for. or what China is becoming on the global stage, but also a place that Chinese people felt proud to bring their friends and their Western sort of friends or colleagues that they were beginning to meet. So to build it as more of like a hub for all things Chinese, but ultimately the client wanted it to be a food destination as well. So luckily, we're all very passionate about Chinese food and East Asian food as a whole. So we began to create a sort of branded approach that basically was about bringing that modernity aspect to Chinatown. So began to create content that positioned it as being a little bit more innovative and modern than people had perceived it. So we created new logos, which were very dynamic in the way that they were created. We actually had a new name, renamed it from an older sort of Cantonese name to Zhongguochang, which was actually a more Mandarin name for a Chinese.
I see.
So there were little things that might not have gone down that well with the community at that time, but we were looking towards the future as the sort of mainland Chinese began to become more influential, and they are now very much so in terms of the restaurant business in the UK. We have a Hai Di Lao now in London, which is amazing. And Din Tai Fung recently opened as well. So we're getting a lot of the big Chinese.
I see. So it was also to attract businesses to establish a presence within Chinatown, Chinese businesses.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the client makes their money from rent, and so it was important to attract a higher caliber of food and beverage offering. But it was also important to ensure that footfall for those clients was the right type of footfall, and so it was more about targeting, the sort of London workforce to choose Chinatown as a food destination. But it did fantastically well. We built an amazing website that kind of blended that feeling of those elements that Western people love so much about China, which is the things that I personally fell in love with, which is all of the cultural elements and the historical elements. And then mixing that with a lot of the young, vibrant modernity. So bringing in some elements of a sort of, China's rise in technology and fashion and things like that. So yeah, it has been hugely successful. If you go to Chinatown now, if you're ever visiting in London, the place is completely transformed to what it was 4 years ago, which is, I think testament to the hard work of both the client and our team.
Talking about Chinatown and talking about subculture, because you mentioned in some of your articles, I can't remember in which publications, I saw you talking about subcultures, tribes, subculture. I'm not talking about China, but I read an article recently talking about C-pop, China pop culture, with singers from China being listened in the West. Or the culture of food from China, even with Xicha, Haiti, which is bubble tea, which is getting popular in the West, which was kind of surprising to me, as much as the surprise I got when I saw TikTok going worldwide. I did not imagine that China would have so quickly soft power, so quickly be as attractive as Korean culture or Japanese culture in the 90s or early 2000s. Are you seeing that in the same way as Korea and Japan? Are you seeing the momentum now, or it's just a little phenomenon that journalists talk about, but it's not really a wave? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, from a soft power point of view, I think it's a lot more subtle than I would say that Japan and Korea have done. I believe that there were a lot of sort of, and I would say even including Hong Kong in that. So Hong Kong cinema, for example, that really had its heyday in the 90s, when a lot of Western people were watching the sort of Jackie Chan films, and they were I remember watching all of the series of sort of Hong Kong police triad movies all the way through my teens. And I didn't speak a word of Chinese. I wasn't really at that point that interested in sort of in Chinese culture. So I think there has been a big shift in the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years towards things that are coming out of China. I wouldn't necessarily say we're listening like to C-pop, but soft power for China has been a lot more about owning the technology and the media channels for them. So obviously, Huawei is at the center of the trade war at the moment. But we've seen this wave of the Oppos, the Xiaomis, and now the ByteDances coming into China, coming into the sort of European markets, South America, Africa. And with that is coming a kind of new perception of China. And I think rather than China necessarily leading with all of the music and film and that element of soft power, they are very much leading from an innovation power point of view. And I think that actually then ladders down or filters down to actually how people perceive Chinese brands, which is what's really allowed, I'd say, companies like Xiaomi and I would certainly say ByteDance is one, and Link & Co is another one. People don't even realize Link & Co is a Chinese company. And it's kind of allowed for a different perception of Chinese products. So we actually see in European markets. So I know Ali, we've sort of had a lot of interactions with the Alibaba group in Europe, and their key markets are France, Spain, and the Netherlands, because in those markets, the younger people there are really keen on buying Chinese products. For
AliExpress, right? You're talking about AliExpress more specifically here.
AliExpress, yeah. So they are providing, I guess, the young Generation Z, the young people in the West. They have not grown up necessarily in seeing China as a backward country.
Exactly,
has been a strong superpower, and therefore they don't have the same preconceptions about Chinese products, and certainly from a price perspective, that's very important to you when you're young. You can't afford to spend £600-700 on an iPhone, but when you can get the same features in a P90, then what are you going to choose? If the branding isn't quite, I guess, say that important to you, or the brand perception and image, then you're going to do very well.
I do really feel the same, as you said, that Korea and Japan entered the West with more culture, manga, and games, whereas China is entering the West with technology, being high-tech, with a Xiaomi, with an Oppo, I said Huawei, and now Chinese products are not seen as low quality or middle quality, but actually at very advanced technology. So that's a change I feel happened like within the last 3 or 5 years, very, very recent, right?
Yeah, I think there are a few challenges that do face Chinese companies. So a lot of the work that we do is about innovation within our business. So when we approach China, we have to get our clients to work in an innovative way, because as you know, the speed at which things move in China, the number of iterations that companies make, and how quickly they get products to market, it's a highly, highly competitive environment. So if you're a Western brand, your only advantage is literally your brand heritage. It's your brand story, it's your brand heritage. So a lot of the time, you have to really ensure that you are keeping up to speed on a service level. And that's what China does really well. They create these innovative services through their marketing. And that innovative-led service approach has not necessarily worked that well in the West, because we have such strong, ingrained legacy ways of doing things. So if you try to bring, they have, right? They've tried to bring in new retail or mobile commerce into Western markets, and we're reluctant to change because it's a big step for us. Whereas China didn't have those big steps, so they had bigger steps, so it was easier to make them rather than making those smaller ones. So what we've found is that for Western companies going to China, they have to be super innovative. And what we found working with the Chinese companies coming internationally is they have to focus on their brand because they have the innovation, they have the technology. But often the struggle is the way that Chinese businesses are set up and structured, and the staff that they have, and all the decisions still being made in China, is that they haven't gone through those decades of being trained in how to necessarily run the marketing campaigns internationally, how to work with agencies. There is a very different relationship between us and a Western client than us and a Chinese client. There's a slave master relationship in China where they feel that you have to do everything that you tell them, that they tell you to do. And you have to work, Jojo Leo, right? So
Jojo Leo is 996 for
6 days a week.
Yeah.
Always available on WeChat.
Yeah. 996 being making popular, just for people to understand. Actually, we talked already about it before in some podcasts. 996 was made popular by Alibaba, I think. Jack might himself say that people have to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week in tech companies, specifically Alibaba.
Yeah, and so there is this environment in China where everybody is always working, always on, which we also have in London, to be honest. However, I think people do respect certain boundaries, and sometimes that's difficult. That's difficult for our Chinese staff as well as our Western staff. So often, I think that the fundamental changes that often need to take place within Chinese businesses is more organizational, structural stuff. I've heard stories of people within some of the really big tech companies, one of which we've worked with, of one person line managing 34 people. I mean, I'm not sure how anybody can line manage 34 people. I think you struggle to do 3 or 4. So that sort of volume of sort of structure and direct reports is something that I think there's still a lot there to learn. I think once Chinese companies can get over that barrier and integrate, I guess, more international, structural systems, hopefully ones that don't slow them down as businesses, retain the innovation. But I think when it comes to marketing process and branding, it's not about rushing in and trying to do too much too quickly. And I think that's where we do bring a lot of value a lot of the time to our Chinese clients, to just make sure that they understand that this is about building a long-term brand equity and brand reputation, and things can just go awry at the click of a finger. So, similar to how we've seen Western companies not succeed in China, ultimately Chinese companies have to be aware that when they go internationally, there are certain things that they have to be careful of in terms of their branding imagery.
So it's a perfect transition for me to talk about your Chinese clients. That's the third actually type of clients I wanted to talk about. One was Chinese, so foreign companies going overseas, foreign companies going to China, like Manchester United, which is a pretty good case. Chinatown, targeting the overseas and the Chinese diaspora. It's another type. And the third type I see within your clients is Chinese clients. So to name a few: Tik Tok, called Douyin in Chinese; China Mobile. I'm reading from your website, but I'm reading also from some notes we got elsewhere out of your website. You also worked for Geely, which is the automaker which bought Volvo and other brands, actually, not only Volvo. Yeah. What did you do for them to target the Western market, especially for China Mobile and TikTok?
Okay, cool. I'll start with Geely then. So with Geely, they are one of the largest car companies on the planet. I don't think people often realize that, but they own brands like Volvo. They own the London Taxi Company. They own half of Proton, which owns Lotus. and as well as having their own sort of Geely branded vehicles, they've also invested in creating a electric car, which is going to be challenging Teslas around the world, which is Lincoln Co., which is already out in China, but it is going to be launching into Europe. And one of the things that really fascinated me when I first started working with Geely is in 1987, Geely made refrigerators, and now they are challenging, some of the sort of world's most innovative car companies. So one of the things that we've been working with them is actually more of at a corporate level, because they don't sell the Geely car into many Western markets. In fact, the markets that they sell into are often sort of very developing countries around sort of Central Asia. So for them, it was more about when they were going to acquire companies, the staff of those companies or the people that worked in those companies had no idea who Geely was. And so there was a lot of fear. There was a fear of, are we going to lose our jobs? Are they going to take all the manufacturing back to China? And in fact, to the credit of Geely, that they've never really done that in terms of the companies that they've acquired. And so it was about building a corporate reputation for them. So it was SEO based largely. It was ensuring that people understood the difference between Geely, the car company in China, and Geely Holding, the commercial group that was actually acquiring these companies and turning them into very strong businesses.
But you say SEO, mainly brand reputations and SEO on their own names, right?
Yeah, so we did sort of, I guess, there's two types of SEO. There's on-site and off-site, right? So we did a lot of off-site work to make sure that when people were searching for them on Google in the Western markets, that there was the right information coming up about Geely and Geely Zhejiang Holding, the holding group. So ensuring that across all of the different touch points where people were talking about Geely, we were making sure that those pieces of information were accurate, because there was a lot of misinformation on the internet. So yeah, a lot of link building, a lot of outreach. And so it's been a very successful one for them. I think they're really a company that I admire a lot, and I think they're going to have a lot of success globally. So China Mobile have a very interesting product, very interesting proposition. It's effectively CM-Link is a SIM card which you can use when you're in the UK as a UK phone number, but it connects to your Chinese phone number in China. So when you're in the UK, you can use it and you can call UK numbers and text UK people, and it's for the cost of what it would be in the UK. And then you use the same phone number, you go back to China, and it costs you the local rate.
Interesting.
International people or students or tourists, they can use their phone number when they're in the UK and in China, and it's basically the same cost, and the same cost for data, which is often the biggest problem. Is when I go to China,
yes.
I have no data, and so I have to rely on Wi-Fi. So one of the things that we've done for them is to help them acquire customers largely. So from a creative point of view, we're doing a lot of video work, and then it will be paid media to ensure that the videos get in front of the right audience group to just explain what that product is for them.
But if I understand, there are two kinds of clients for China Mobile here. There are the Chinese students in the UK, and there are maybe actually foreign students who go to China, or even foreign business people who go to China.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, it's creating content that can be used for both the Chinese and Western people. And I think that really is, it's becoming a lot more common, those type of briefs for us, where there are multiple audiences. It's not just the Chinese and it's not just the Western audiences. So it becomes a very different. We often try to keep the same creative from a cost point of view. So to just sort of minimize the amount of video shooting and things like that we need to do at the beginning. But then as soon as we start splitting out the channels that we need to distribute on, we have to have slightly different edits slightly different messages and paid sort of media planning. So yeah, it's become quite common for us to both do Western markets and UK and Chinese market for the same client. And TikTok is a fun. I love the product. I think that the biggest challenge for them is that they, obviously in China, when you're on Douyin, the Chinese name for TikTok, is the types of content that you get on Douyin is very, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of very interest based almost. So there's a lot of food content on there. There's a lot of like weird DIY. I saw one where this guy's making fixing things with instant noodles. There are obviously the singing and the dancing side of things, but there's also sports and sort of magic videos, and there's just a lot of creativity on the platform. Now, when Douyin became TikTok and expanded internationally, they acquired a platform called Musical.ly. And Musical.ly was effectively a platform largely used by teenage, largely females, that had a lot of content which was like lip syncing or dancing kind of videos. So they wanted to effectively get more people on the platform to create better content. But the problem was people were going onto the platform and seeing all of the Musical.ly content and then coming straight off it. So in terms of generating their user growth, they had to have people that were almost not, I wouldn't say incentivized, but had a reason that they feel that if they were creating content on this platform, people would see it, it would grow, and the platform as a whole would mature. So very similar to what YouTube do with having sort of YouTube creators, where they incubate a lot of people to help them create content on YouTube. We began to come up with campaign ideas for TikTok, how they could activate more in the UK to effectively get young creative people, whether it's football freestylers, graffiti artists, rappers, onto the platform to create content. So we did a university campaign for them to go right to the kind of like the heart of young creatives in the UK, looking at all of the arts and drama, music universities around the country. And then we ran a big competition tapping into, I think, not necessarily young people's hunger to be famous or internet famous, as you might call it, but more into the fact that any young creative, what they largely want is people to see their work and to recognize their work. So the competition was all around driving this idea of a million people will see your content if you win this particular competition. So
which platform did you use to interact with to get more audience for TikTok? Did you use Facebook? Did you use billboards? What did you use?
So the irony of this is they spent a huge amount on Facebook and Instagram ads. So it's
they're competitors, basically.
Yeah, so they did a lot of social media advertising. Instagram was probably the number one channel because it's a similar format but extremely different format at the same time. So that was the one where they put a lot of their media spend behind. They did a lot of YouTube ads as well, pre-roll. And we actually did physical on the ground executions on campus at universities, which is one of the way you really, because part of the whole journey is really getting people to learn how the platform works. And so it's one thing to get them to download it. The download KPI is actually quite easy. It's never a difficult one. It's actually how do you get people to continuously create
retention.
Yeah, and they'd spent a lot of money previously on some of the world's biggest YouTubers, and they'd use the platform, but they're not really engaged with it long term. So now it's really about working alongside agencies as well as young creators to get more clients as well, more businesses to understand the power of that short video format, which is organic platforms that you can get reach on.
It's soon going to be 1 hour. We still have like 10 minutes. There is one thing you wanted to talk about, and I was surprised you wanted to talk about that. It is about China 2025 and the challenges Chinese companies may face overseas. What have you analyzed and what have you seen within the plan made in China 2025 that makes sense for you, and how do you interpret what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, for us, China 2025 is, well, made in China 2025 is kind of one of these government policies that I think is going to bring a lot of benefit to the digital industry, especially the digital marketing industry, which we're in, largely because what the main focus is obviously bringing that manufacturing and innovation and containing it within China. It's very similar to the issues that they're currently having with, let's say, Huawei and ARM, the chip manufacturer for Huawei, wanting to pull their chips from Huawei. If China has their own chip manufacturers, then they wouldn't have this particular issue. So that is what China sort of Made in China 2025 is kind of at its core focusing on. But that investment and development is going to spend a huge amount of technological innovation, which is going to be sort of spreading across the whole globe. And what we see that in changing is what we were talking about earlier in terms of soft power, is that we believe that those technology companies are going to really transform further the way that Western people perceive China. I think there is still very much a stigma attached to China. It's not completely gone away, I wouldn't say, and it's we're only talking in let's say the mobile phone industry or the drone industry are probably the ones that people go, yeah, China's the best at doing those. What we believe it will see is that once China begins to spread into artificial intelligence more on a global level, into augmented reality, virtual reality, all of these areas, that it's going to drive sort of new media. And new media is where marketing happens. It's where digital marketing happens. So when we see platforms like ByteDance actually succeeding on an international level, it makes us really excited because, in fact, it's shaking up the entire format of the traditional digital industry. So for us, it's a way to activate in new ways, in sort of new sort of approaches to how to build sort of customer interaction. And if we look at the innovations that have come out of China, I mean, people have been talking for 5 years about how WeChat is so much better than WhatsApp. And now WhatsApp experimenting with WhatsApp Pay in India, and sort of trying to build out the service offering they have for brands to do customer service through WhatsApp. And for a long time, we've been talking about these trends and how I wish I could do this on these platforms in the West. Now, because those things are starting to happen, it's changing the way that people service or Western consumers can be serviced through digital platforms, which traditionally today we haven't been able to do because the platforms haven't allowed us to do it. So I'm really excited about the prospect of being able to do the types of social CRM work that we do on WeChat in Western markets, because I do see how powerful it is to have these formats where you can have those better interactions with the customers. You can better provide services for the customers. It can happen more quickly. It's more integrated. And so I see China, Made in China 2025, as kind of like spearheading those developments for Chinese companies. And I think that's really going to benefit, personally, us as a business. But anybody that has that experience of running campaigns in China, I think it will begin to become relevant for running campaigns in Western markets.
I see. Thank you very much. I'm looking at your logo behind you. Those who listen to us and not watching us may not see it, but basically, if I describe it, your logo looks, sorry, it's written Qumin, but it looks a bit more like the logo of Tmall, right? Did you do it on purpose? How did you make that? It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's kind of largely got some of the elements in there of what we're talking about, the chat messenger apps, and just trying to make it a little bit more, explain how we're doing a lot of communications type works with the speech bubbles. But yeah, I never actually noticed that it looks like the Timor Global thing.
Reversed.
By a Chinese designer, so I'm sure they.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the actual name Qumin in Chinese, it means interesting people. But the how it really came about before we had the Chinese name, it's named after the spice cumin, or ziran in Chinese.
I see.
Which is the spice that you often have on your lamb kebabs in China, on the street markets and things. And because Arnold is from Xi'an in China, when he grew up, the kind of smell of cumin is something that whenever he smells cumin, it reminds him of home. So that's where the name originally came from. So we, for SEO purposes, we changed it to a Q. We were for a long time, people struggled to pronounce the name, but it's always pronounced correctly in Chinese because the Chinese is read.
Yeah, and that gives for you an image of being local and just in China to have a pinyin name, I believe, toward your clients. Thank you very much, Thomas, for the time, for waking up so early in London. It was very, very interesting, very specific. I love when you were talking about the cases to understand better why those companies needed your services and why they entered China, why they developed a relationship with China, or the other way around to advertise in the West. Thank you very much again, and hope all of our listeners enjoyed the talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day.
Weekend.